All right, welcome everybody again to the final InterReach webinar of the 2024-2025 year. We are really excited to see so many wonderful faces and very excited to present this panel. So as you know, it's part of the series Intentional Integration. How do we know if we're doing it? And the session title for this webinar is Analyzing Knowledge Integration in Convergence Research. So this is going to get into some real studying themselves as they do things magic and really looking under the hood. And I just can't tell you how much I have loved watching this team kind of from afar. This is a self-evaluation approach of a National Science Foundation growing convergence research project. And they look at some linkages between their integration approaches and products. And they'll tell us all about that and leave some time for us to also discuss as a group. So I'm going to introduce all three speakers at once and then hand it over so they can have the floor. We're really pleased to have Shalini Misra, who is an associate professor at the School of Public and International Affairs at Virginia Tech. She has got so many things I could highlight. She's been very big in the science of team science field for a long time, and her research focuses on the social, psychological, and cultural implications of emerging digital technologies and the study of collaborative processes and outcomes of cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral research initiatives. And she's got all kinds of amazing backgrounds that she brings to that. And then she is joined by colleague Dr. Megan Rippy, who is an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering, also at Virginia Tech. And Dr. Rippy is an assistant professor there in the department with a BS in marine biology, a PhD in oceanography, and I love seeing all the different disciplines mixed together. And her work focuses on characterizing and modeling green infrastructure services and their socio-ecological drivers. It's very hard not to just talk about each of these folks for 10 minutes, but I will be stealing their time if I do. And then we're also joined by Dr. Stan Grant, who is the director of the Occoquan, and please correct that, Watershed Monitoring Lab, and professor of civil and environmental engineering as well at Virginia Tech. So in addition to directing the OWML, Dr. Grant is also an emeritus professor in civil and environmental engineering at University of California, Irvine. So we've got a lot of Irvine cred here, one of the birthplaces of real team science and integration in practice. And he has all kinds of water quality research cred and spans lots of different boundaries in leading transdisciplinary projects. So with that, I will let our speakers correct anything that I didn't get quite right and let us in on how they are doing this convergence thing and how they know that they're doing this convergence thing. So y'all take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's so wonderful to see you and Christine and make new friends, Amalia and Kim. I'm so happy that Dan Stokos, lovely, lovely Dan Stokos is here today. That's a surprise as well. So I can't wait to get started. Let me just share my slides and go into slideshow mode. All right, hopefully you're able to see the slides. All right. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Our presentation is titled Analyzing Knowledge Integration in Convergence Research. And we're happy to note and acknowledge that this research was funded by the National Science Foundation through a growing convergence research project. So the genesis of this research project really started because the NSF Growing Convergence Research funding is divided into two phases. And funding is first provided for the first 2 years. And then there is something called a reverse site visit where teams are evaluated. And then a short list of teams, is selected for the second phase of funding. And when we were up for this second phase of funding, we decided that we really need to take stock of how we are defining convergence and implementing it in this particular project. So that was the motivation for engaging in this kind of self-evaluation research. And I'll get into our objectives in a little bit. So just to provide an overview, we will talk about our research questions. Stan will provide a background of the NSF-GCR project and orient you to the problem, the social ecological problem that we are addressing in this project. I will introduce a new analytical framework that we built from the ground up to evaluate the integrative processes and products of convergence research. We will outline the findings, how we implemented this framework and outline our findings of this self-evaluation process, and then provide some conclusions and recommendations for other convergence research projects and initiatives. So here's our research objectives. We first develop an analytical framework to examine knowledge integration, and we bridge a wide variety of literature that is dispersed across continents, right? And are usually siloed in, even within transdisciplinary, the study of collaborative processes. The Europeans, for example, define transdisciplinarity differently than US scholars and researchers do. So we try to integrate a lot of literature to develop a new analytical framework to examine the linkages between the processes and outcomes of knowledge integration in a real world project. Then we applied this framework to assess knowledge integration and processes and products just in the first 2 years of our project. And then we distilled and conveyed the lessons that we learned for ourselves, as well as for other research projects that can inform the design and implementation of future research endeavors. So here are our research questions. How can we evaluate the integrative processes and products of convergence research? How are approaches to integration linked with the integrative products? So what are the linkages between integration approaches and the actual outcome, right? One of the types of outcomes that result from employing these integration approaches. And specifically, we were interested in the team composition. How does the size of the team, the breadth of the disciplines involved in those teams and sub-teams, and the expertise involved, the level of engagement and participation of the actors in those sub-teams, as well as the socio-cognitive frameworks used for collaboration. How are these factors linked to the integrative and intellectual quality of the research products? So I'm now going to turn it over to Stan to provide you with an introduction and background to the Convergence Research Project.
Thank you, Shalini, and I'll try to keep it short. I think the last time I presented, I ended up spending the lion's share of the time, and obviously we're here to talk about the convergence piece, so I'll try to keep it brief. But our project is focused on freshwater salinization, and this is a phenomenon that's occurring throughout the United States and really throughout the world, where essentially human activities are generating a lot of salt waste, which ends up in our freshwaters, and so those freshwaters are salinizing with time, and that has significant implications for both freshwater ecosystems. Obviously, those are evolved and adapted for freshwaters, not saltwaters, as well as water supply. And in our particular case, we're focused on the water supply dimension primarily. Next slide. So yeah, there we go. Yeah, so one of the key elements of convergence research, as NSF defined it in the request for proposals that we responded to for this particular proposal or this particular project, is that it integrates knowledge, tools, and ways of thinking across disciplinary boundaries to form a synthetic framework for tackling scientific and societal challenges. And like all good projects, next slide, you know, this particular one, its origin story is really a failure, which is that I had submitted an engineering research center pre-proposal, and and it had crashed and burned in review. And so I'm on a rooftop bar in Anchorage, Alaska, with my high school buddy Tom Birkland, who happens to be a professor of public policy at NC State University, and we were talking about, how does environmental engineering really plug in and help solve some of these grand challenge problems? And it's like, well, you really should look at Eleanor Ostrom's work, because there may be a kind of an angle there. And so I'm sure many of you, or all of you, are aware, probably much more than I am, of her contributions. But her central focus is on common pool resource theory, and specifically the common pool resources in this category, or in this context, are those resources which would be very difficult to exclude users, and also the resource itself exhibits subtractability. That is, it basically can become, its use can reduce its availability to others. And we thought about it and realized that freshwater salinization very much falls into this. It's difficult to exclude users because basically when we walk into our kitchen and we pour things down the sink, the waste products, detergents, soaps, and so on, all of these contain salts, and those salts end up going into a sewage collection system, into a wastewater treatment plant. They generally go through the wastewater treatment plant. They aren't removed. And end up in fresh waters. So we're consuming the salt assimilative capacity, essentially, of those freshwater systems every time we flush something down the drain. And likewise, during the winter, if we live in colder climates, we use de-icers on roads and so on, and those end up washing into freshwater ecosystems, and they're also consuming both the freshwater assimilative capacity for salt, as well as basically it would be very difficult to exclude users from doing so. So anyway, we thought, okay, this is an interesting framing and could really be something that's generalizable to to other significant environmental problems, and maybe serve as a framework specifically for thinking about how to address these grand challenge problems in a kind of holistic way. So next slide. And in particular, some of you may also be aware that late in her life, she published two papers, one in PNAS and the other in Science, in which she laid out what she called her social ecological systems, or SES framework, for addressing common pool resource problems, that really was intended to be integrative, to really span boundaries. And within that framework, she defined a set of first and second level variables that could be used potentially as a diagnostic framework for thinking about, what aspects of a common pool resource system, like this sort of salinization of a freshwater resource, could be facilitated in some way to improve collective management of that problem. And so we thought this would be a really great integrative framework for applying to freshwater salinization of a very specific system that I've been really thinking about for a while, which is the Occoquan Reservoir. It's a drinking water resource for about 1 million people, and it is salinizing. So we wanted to apply this SES framework from Eleanor Ostrom, to the salinization problem in the Occoquan Reservoir. Next slide. And we had a couple of hypotheses, or claims, probably would be more accurate description of them. The first was that bottom-up stakeholder-driven efforts to reverse inland freshwater salinization, like the salinization of the Occoquan Reservoir, can be catalyzed through convergence research around the barriers identified by applying Ostrom's SES to local conditions. Next slide. And so basically, in short, what we're doing is we're tackling inland freshwater salinization, specifically of the Occoquan Reservoir, by adopting Ostrom's framework for bottom-up management of common pool resource problems as our novel framework for catalyzing discovery, innovation, and integrating tools, method, knowledge, expertise, and so on in alignment with the goals of the NSF. So this was actually a quote out of our proposal, kind of the central thesis. Next slide. And so this is a pretty picture of the Occoquan Reservoir. It's a water supply for about 1 million people in Northern Virginia. Next slide. And I think this is a sequence. So if you move forward, one of the challenges here, this is the black boundary is the boundaries of the Occoquan watershed that drains to the reservoir, which is located in the kind of right side there. But basically, over the last 20 to 30 years, it's essentially a bedroom community for Washington, D.C. So it's been undergoing a tremendous amount of growth. Population was originally thought to be capped, or there was a desire to cap it at 100,000. I think we're at like 400,000 or 500,000, and basically continuing to grow very rapidly. So with the tremendous population pressure, a lot of impervious surfaces associated with that. A lot of households and businesses that are connecting to the sanitary sewer system, and that treated wastewater drains to the reservoir itself as well. And you go ahead and move forward through this sequence. Yeah, so you can kind of see that impervious cover spreading out over time through the watershed. Yeah, kind of like if you've ever been in a microbiology lab, it's a little bit like a bacterial colony spreading out over a petri dish. So that basically humans grow in a similar way. So anyway, certainly impervious cover, all of the salt that is associated with that through de-icing activities and other activities is basically one of the contributors to salinization of the Occoquan Reservoir. Another really key component I hinted at a moment ago is the fact that that treated wastewater is also entering the Occoquan Reservoir from this community. And in fact, this is the country's first large-scale experiment in indirect potable reuse, where you essentially take that treated wastewater and you add it in a deliberate way to a reservoir that serves as a drinking water supply for a lot of people. And so all of those products that we're pouring down the sink eventually end up at the wastewater treatment plant. They pass through again and into the reservoir. So that was another major contribution. So if you move forward, yeah. So this basically was kind of we called it our squid of convergence, and basically indicating that we really had these three different threads of research going on that we were trying to bring together through Eleanor Ostrom's SCS framework. That is, we had a biophysical team covering a lot of different kind of more science-focused aspects of the problem. We had a very engaged stakeholder team. They were quite worried about this because the trends were such that it didn't require too much extrapolation to realize that at some point the water in that reservoir would be undrinkable. And the solution really from the drinking water treatment plant's perspective would be to essentially add a reverse osmosis treatment upgrade, which would cost right up front about $1 billion to implement, and then enormous energy costs, carbon footprint problems, waste disposal problems because you generate a concentrate which has to be disposed of and so on. So really significant stakeholder engagement, and that's been a truly wonderful aspect of this project for me. As academics, we get distracted and we've got a lot of other things to do. The stakeholders, this is the thing that they care about the most. And so that kind of continuity and consistency has been in deep and abiding interest in what we're doing and what we're finding has been truly a pleasure, as far as I'm concerned in this project. And then also a governance team, which really brings in the social science and the comparable resource theory and so on. And because we have these two major sources of salinity, we have the wastewater treatment plant, which is again So receiving sewage, which has all of this, basically you walk down the aisle in a grocery store and all of those products on the shelves are going to end up in the sanitary sewer system. And then ultimately the salt from those are going to end up in this drinking water supply. So we wanted to focus first really on trying to characterize what's going on in terms of wastewater salinization. Where is that, where is that salinity coming from? And what could we potentially do about it? That was our phase one. And then Shalini mentioned we went through a reverse site visit. And then our goal was to kind of expand our focus to include both watershed sources and wastewater sources in phase two, which we're currently in. Next slide. And so here's our logic model. The inputs obviously are funding. We've kind of accumulated funding sources as we've gone along. NSF was quite interested in the sustainability of the Convergence Research Project. They realized that it was kind of a down payment that given the scope of these projects, the amount of money that we're talking about was really insufficient. And so we had some local funding, but that's really expanded over time to include a new project, for example, from the Water Research Foundation and other sources of funding. But certainly that's an input. Our collaborative methods include things like joint fact-finding, fuzzy cognitive mapping, team integration efforts along the lines of what Shalini is leading. We had a really, as I mentioned before, super engaged stakeholder team involving all those different entities there, biophysical team and a governance team. And then we divided, at least initially, and I think Shalini is going to talk a little bit about how, even the kind of way that we conducted our research changed over time. But we initially divided our research activities into acts, which are listed there. I won't kind of go through in detail, but our goal was to really produce short-term, intermediate, and long-term outputs from that, or outcomes. And really with the goal kind of in the bottom there of framing what we were doing through Ostrom's SES. And what's been really interesting, kind of managing a very large scale project like this with so many moving pieces and so many different ontologies and epistemologies is really convincing everybody that it all makes sense, right? I think that the stakeholders were very reluctant to think about Ostrom. It sounded very theoretical to them. But I think over time, like, for example, we have a paper in review now, which really, basically puts Ostrom front and center. And we've got the stakeholders as co-authors on that. And so they really, I think, have seen the value, at least, grudgingly, in thinking about things from kind of a more theoretical perspective too, at least in terms of the generalizability. So I think I'll move on, yeah, and then maybe hand it over to you, Shalini.
Thank you, Stan. All right, so now I will talk about this particular study and the theoretical analytical framework that we developed for evaluating the processes and outcomes of knowledge integration. We tried to be parsimonious in the kind of analytical framework that we created. We focused on the linkages between the scholarly products that were created in the first 2 years of this research project and the specific engagement and integration processes that resulted in those products. So we divided our knowledge integration processes into 2 evaluation criteria: the perceived level of engagement of each of the actors in the production of that particular research artifact or entity, as well as the socio-cognitive framework that was used for facilitating integration to develop that particular product. As far as knowledge integration products are concerned, we were interested in papers, articles, abstracts, boundary objects, theories that resulted from these integration processes. And we talked about or assessed the scope of integration as well as the type of integration. And I'll go into what these mean in the context of our research. All right, so I won't go into a lot of detail in the perceived level of engagement of the actors over here. That's one of our criteria for our dimensions for assessing knowledge integration processes. All of you are familiar with Bennett and Gadlin's work, as well as the International Association for Public Participation, as well as public policy scholars, Nabachi and colleagues. We integrated these lines of research from different disciplines and came up with a typology of the level of engagement of actors within a particular research activity. And this is a kind of a continuum, but not exactly, doesn't really meet the strict criteria for a spectrum or a continuum. But there are key differences between consultation, cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. And one key difference is the level of shared understanding or agreement of the goals of the project, so or a research activity. So in consultation, there's no need for any shared agreement or of the research goal or activity. Researchers reach out to practitioners, community members, policy makers, and seek input or feedback on ideas and findings. So it's one way, and there is really no need for a shared understanding of the particular project. Collaboration, on the other end of the spectrum, using the word loosely, really cannot be done without a shared understanding of the research goal or activity. So to achieve those research goals, this type of research activity is just not possible if there are no collective goals, and if the divergent or diverse skills and expertise of the various members of the team are not utilized. Cooperation and coordination lie in between. Cooperation can or may not have a shared research goal, but there is an understanding that that members obtain some kind of mutual benefit by dividing up or partitioning the work. Coordination is more coordinated. There's the intention or the goal is to be efficient in the way that you produce the product to avoid gaps and overlaps in individuals' assigned work. So therefore, there's more efficiency and effectiveness in a coordination approach. But the big difference between coordination and collaboration is that collaboration really requires team members to understand the expertise and skills in a particular research team, and to be able to actually utilize them in the delivery of the particular product. So in terms of socio-cognitive frameworks used by teams or sub-teams to organize these collaborative activities, we integrated or synthesized Rossini and Porter's early work in 1979 with more recent work from the Swiss researchers, actually, Hoffman and colleagues, who had expanded Rossini's work and developed a new socio-cognitive framework to assess the processes of integration within our research project that other teams can use as well. So here, these four kind of socio-cognitive models or frameworks differ in two aspects. One is how much deliberation and dialogue they really involve, and two, who is really doing the integration. So in common group learning, for example, the integration processes are shared across the team. It occurs through reflection and dialogue among the entire team, right? The larger team. And as you can imagine, this is really rare in large teams, extremely large teams such as ours, which involved more than 50 to 60 individuals in our team, including the stakeholders. Modeling is another approach in which there is a conceptual framework, an integrative or synthetic conceptual framework that is created a priori, and that framework is used or applied in different aspects of the research project. We use this quite a bit, given that we had Ostrom as and her social ecological framework as an initial kind of model to frame our research. In deliberation and negotiation among experts, integration takes place in smaller groups through one or more rounds of exchange across these team members. And these sub-teams are created based on the needs of the particular project. And then fourth, we have integration by leader, in which the team leader actually does a lot of the integration work, and this team leader could be an integration expert, could be a boundary spanner, could be the PI or co-PI of the project. And this team leader acquires a lot of composite knowledge through one-on-one interactions with various team members, but the integration is really happening through the synthesis that the team leader really does. Now, in terms of the products, we were interested, I said, in the scope of integration as well as the type of integration. So in the scope of integration, we looked to Hutoniemi's work, earlier work in 2010, and kind of elaborated that framework to define narrow and broad cross-disciplinarity. And narrow cross-disciplinarity really is when research products do synthesize theories, methods, approaches, but the disciplines that are integrated are closely related or compatible with each other, and they address the same level of analysis. So, for example, molecular biology with genetics. Broad interdisciplinarity is when research products bridge theories, approaches, methodologies with widely disparate disciplines. So history, for example, with biology. And as you can see, they address different levels of analysis as well, right? So widely divergent levels of analysis. In terms of the type of integration, we integrated a large variety of literature that has addressed qualitatively how research products can be evaluated for their unidisciplinary to transdisciplinary qualities. So unidisciplinary research can be integrative as well, but in unidisciplinary products, research groups are made up of closely related interests or disciplines. The topics of or themes are, again, come from very closely related or the same disciplines and fields to address a common research problem. Disciplinary concepts and methods, this is key, are retained. There's no elaboration of any type of method. And work really occurs sequentially or independently. And so what happens is that the expertise with the same or closely related fields are really modularized to produce new knowledge. And the interaction, therefore, is mostly technical. The research tasks are externalized to different members of the team within the same discipline or a field, and then findings are aggregated. Multidisciplinary research is a step forward from unidisciplinary research. Here, there is a coordinated plan for transferring knowledge between different disciplinary modules. But again, these individuals who are part of this team remain anchored to their discipline. So expertise in different fields is, again, modularized, and the interaction between these fields is mostly technical, after which the findings are integrated. So there's more coordination, but not really synthesis or integration. So methodology findings are not integrated across disciplines. New hypotheses are not created. The interaction between, or the intellectual interaction between fields is limited. The work occurs sequentially in multidisciplinary research. In interdisciplinary research products, the data integration occurs between different fields. There are key defined relationships between the data that is coming from different disciplines, or evidence from different disciplines are used to test more integrative hypotheses or address a research question or produce or translate knowledge to policymakers. And in interdisciplinary research, the research is more hypotheses driven, and it could also involve a reanalysis of existing data sets. So, just to be clear, each research product doesn't require all of these things. It could be one or more of these kind of qualities. Transdisciplinary or convergence research products, they translate societal problems, first of all, to concrete research questions or hypotheses. And it's evident in the way that these products and papers are written. They could involve comparative analysis of concepts of models from divergent disciplines. They could use an integrative method that involves the elaboration of unidisciplinary methods. And in the product, a shared understanding of concepts and theoretical frameworks that come from various disciplines is evident. So they create content that creates more generalizable or generic links between fields that other researchers could use. And so the product really creates a new territory of knowledge, a new paradigm of inquiry, because it's triangulating either theories or methodological approaches from a variety of disciplines. So what we did in our research project is that we took the first 2 years of the corpus of the work that the team had created in the first 2 years, and that resulted in 15 scholarly research products. Those were our research products that we evaluated. And each project leader in the team reviewed independently each of these products, using the analytical framework that I just described. And then once they had done this independently, we came together and we discussed the similarities and differences in our individual ratings to understand how we are understanding these concepts, whether the analytical framework is really working, whether it needs to be iterated or modified, and then we came to an agreement between how each scholarly product should be classified according to our evaluation criteria. And that was where the reflection and dialogue really took place. We also shared this with the broader team to engage in a broader dialogic process that involved all the members of our biophysical and governance teams. And now I will turn it over to my colleague and friend, Meg, to talk about the statistics of what we actually found.
Hello, everyone. So again, I get to talk about the statistics part of this, how we actually operationalized this process. So we used a statistical approach known as agglomerative hierarchical clustering analysis to identify really clusters or groups of research projects that had comparable integrative quality and collaborative processes. And we went through sort of as our different categories, all of the different dimensions, that Shalini was just talking about. And we had to come up with a way to standardize them because some of these were numerical variables, like the number of participating actors or the number of participating disciplines. So we computed tied ranks for all of those so they'd be ranked, from highest down to lowest. And then the others were all categorical levels. So we needed to recast those as ordinal variables so they'd also, be ranked so that everything was on the same footing and we could actually perform this kind of analysis. We did a Euclidean distance estimate from the normalized ranks of all of the different variables. And then clusters of products were determined using what's known as a complete linkage. And that's just a fancy way for saying that we wanted to have really compact clusters, things that group together really well in our assessment. So next slide. And this is our little result here. It's a heat map, clustering results presented as a heat map. And I wanted to orient you to this because I'm going to talk about it through the next couple of slides. The vertical axis on this heat map is all of the different products that we were looking at, from this little stream synoptic study all the way down to kind of understanding the social ecological system of freshwater salinization, their abstracts, papers, and the like, as Shalini was talking about. Along the horizontal axis, we have all of those collaborative process variables, from integration approach all the way over to cross-disciplinary type. The color indicates kind of the level of the variable, with blue being kind of our lower levels or smaller numbers, and red being higher, kind of more complicated and deeper processing. And then the horizontal dendrograms, you can see all of these different colors have these little dendrograms on sort of the top and on the side. The horizontal one is what actually shows our clusters of products. So we kind of got a group 1, group 2, and group 3 broken out there. And then the vertical dendrogram identifies groups of variables that had similar behavior across those products. Most of them were kind of similar. The one that was a little different in terms of how it grouped out was integration approach. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to use this heat map to talk about 3 of our key findings from doing this process. And the first thing I wanted to point out here, and it's the part that's kind of highlighted, that column highlighted in red, is that the early phases of a convergence research initiative involve a variety of research approaches and products, ranging from unidisciplinary work to interdisciplinary. We did not have any convergence research transdisciplinary products at this early phase of this project, but really it was a mixture, of all of these different things. And we'd expect that these approaches would evolve, as team members get to know each other, they begin to understand the potential contributions to different disciplines, they develop integrative skills, and they advance the kinds of systems, target, and transformation knowledge that is relevant to the problem they're tackling. So we may get to those, convergence of products into the second phase, and we kind of hints that we're getting there. Next slide. So our second key finding focuses more on those groups of products. And I've highlighted kind of the group 3 ones down at the bottom. And the thing that we found here is that our larger, more heterogeneous teams that had a broader mix of disciplines. So in terms of actors here, we're looking at 17 to 47 people. And then expertise, it's like 8 to 14 disciplines and different types of professional expertise. They produced more interdisciplinary research products, just in general. However, these teams tended to rely on skilled integration by a single team leader. That tended to be the form at this stage, and really intensive collaboration and inclusive problem framing. And that allowed them to generate those products that were more interdisciplinary. So that was kind of one of our main results here. Next slide. Taking a look at the other 2 groups, we see that we have smaller subteams. So we're more like 2 to 9 individual actors involved here, and a narrower range of disciplines, maybe 2 to 4 disciplines. That they were more likely to rely on deliberation by experts as their sociocognitive framework. And that's particularly evident in that kind of group 2 that's broken out, where it was all deliberation by experts. They tended to use more consultative, cooperative, or coordinative mechanisms for engagement in lieu of collaboration. And they were more likely to produce research projects that were unidisciplinary. And we see that most strongly looking at group 1, which was mostly unidisciplinary products with just a couple multidisciplinary thrown in. Next slide. So what do we do with all of this? And Shalini alluded at this a little bit earlier. We thought it was really important to reflect together, as a team. And so in preparation for kicking off that second phase of the project, years 3 through 5, we organized a 2-day workshop that involved all of the research team members, so the preliminary results of this self-evaluation could be shared and discussed. And then the team members' reflections on these 3 key findings, and others, informed a set of 6 conclusions and recommendations for convergence research initiatives that Shalini is going to talk about next.
All right. So what can we say about these statistics, these findings, right? One thing that we kind of learned from this process is that it really benefits teams to engage in a self-evaluation approach early on, and also in an intermediate stage throughout the collaboration. So, and it's not only for dialogue and critical reflection and assessment of our own processes and thinking about our organizational structure, the quality of our products, what are we actually learning from the research that we are creating, as well as the long-term outcomes of our research product. But we also thought that the self-evaluation approach is in some ways really more transparent than evaluation approaches that bring in evaluators from outside to conduct research evaluation. So it opens up the kind of evaluation process to team members, all of the team members. It engages people in engaging in self-evaluation as well as evaluation of the team processes. And that doesn't mean that everything is really positive, really, over here. It also requires people to be, and team members to be, open to engaging in that kind of deep self-reflection and evaluation, and being open to critiques that emerge from this process, and then the compulsion to change as a result of the findings. So one of the things that we saw in our research structure or organizational structure is that the way that we had organized our team, primarily through unidisciplinary kind of domains and teams, our biophysical team, our governance team, and our stakeholder team, actually had a big influence on the kinds of scholarly products we created and the breadth and integrative quality of those products. So we would say really pay attention to your sub-team composition early in the stage of your project, depending on what the goals of your research project are. So we found, as Meg alluded, right, that the breadth of disciplines, larger teams really with more variety of disciplines produce the more integrative products. But there's a big important moderator variable over here, or a couple of moderator variables. It really depends on the integrative capacity of the leader, right? The skilled integration of the leader and the kind of process that was used to develop those integrative products. So integrative insights emerged through one, the skills of this leader, as well as the intensive dialogue that occurred within the small groups. And also because the problem was conceptualized inclusively right from the outset. So another kind of piece of advice that we would give when you pay attention to these sub-team compositions, pay attention, kind of design that research question more inclusively, right? That, sets the stage for more creative questions, more integrative questions. And then building in the time for small group reflective activities that are focused not only on the particular research problem, but also focused on generating integrative insights. So we'll just talk very briefly about what we did with these findings, when this kind of compelled us to kind of change course on some of the things that we were doing in our research project. So number one, we designed a set of reflective activities at the end of this phase, at the end of this intermediary evaluation process. And we did something called a modified idea tree exercise that was focused on developing integrative questions. And we let people really be free, in the kinds of questions that they develop. We didn't address all of those questions, of course, they're for future research projects, but it allowed people to feel motivated and have more kind of skin in the game in this particular research project, right? And so this shaped new research directions and new research projects beyond this grant period. It also kind of made us realize that our research has limitations, right? It's only focusing on research products. It's not focusing on many other parts of the research process. We didn't focus, it's only talks about the perspectives of researchers and the leaders of this team. It doesn't really bring in even the broader team, right? And it didn't bring in the perspectives of the professional experts, right? So we designed a new evaluation study, a broader evaluation study that brings in the perspectives on knowledge integration of the professional experts. We also talked to graduate students and postdocs on their perspectives of knowledge integration in this new summative evaluation study. And we brought in other metrics of knowledge integration beyond scholarly products, such as social learning, as well as changes in researchers' transdisciplinary orientation. Yay! That's it. We have 10 minutes for questions. I'm going to stop the share over here. And thank you so much for listening. And we're so happy to take questions, critiques as well, jokes.
Thank you, Shalini, and all of you, Megan and Stan. Every bit of that was fascinating. And thank you for leaving a little bit of time for questions. There's a bunch in the chat. So I guess as a start, if you, because you've been our magnanimous entertainers, you have no doubt not seen them. But if you want to take a moment, you could look and see if any of them grab you that you really would like to respond to.
Yeah, I had not seen them. I don't know. My mind doesn't I can't do two things at the same time. I'm going to look at them right now.
Well, I think you do many things all at the same time, which you just scientifically shared with us. But yeah, you can't also read the chat.
I can, while Shalini and Meg are looking them over, I can respond to the one from Stephen. The question about kind of finding a place for transdisciplinary research within the sort of publication ecosystem that exists, and certainly my response was, this has been a huge learning curve for me. I guess I kind of assumed that because I thought the results were interesting and this combination was interesting, that everybody else would too, which of course is a bad assumption. And we had an example where we had, I guess, in retrospect, perhaps a mashup of some modeling and social science in the Ostrom framework that we submitted to PNAS, and it went out for review. And I was like, we made it out for review, and then it was rejected. And one of the reviewers said, "This is truly a strange paper." that this idea that it had all these things going on simultaneously, I think, just blew the reviewer's mind and did not play well. So I think trying to figure out exactly what the messaging is, and then also making sure that these different pieces really work in a way that is self-evident to reviewers is quite challenging, at least has been for me. And I feel like it was on us to do that properly, and it's not something that I think most of us were trained to do. So certainly not me.
Oh, it looks like Meg has answered so many of the questions over here. One question is about how the products were selected, and they're all papers, right, or extended abstracts. So we made a decision to be able to really assess and use the framework, the analytical framework, in a more or less similar way to to all of the research products. We needed some kind of depth, right, to those research products, right, and they needed to be textual and narrative, and they needed to provide some information about the methods, the analytical frameworks that they were using, and the findings, right. So therefore we kind of chose papers that had that kind of depth, to be able to assess and use the frameworks, and however, I think this could be used for grant proposals, as well. Little more difficult for boundary objects, I think, because it requires much more elaboration and discussion, but it's well suited to textual and narrative kind of research products. Professor Stokols.
Yes, I just want to say kudos to you all for your systematic efforts and very innovative efforts, I think, to evaluate the processes and products of convergence research. And I would think that at both a methodological level and conceptual level, there are a number of training implications of your research for the field. So I just wondered if you've thought about any of those training applications, even though the research is still in an early phase.
Yes, actually, I didn't mention it in my ways forward, and what did we do as a result of these findings. So one of the things that we actually did find out through our self-evaluation is that the new team members, we have a very fluid team structure. So we have graduate students coming in and going out, master students leaving after 2 years, new team members coming in, people leaving postdocs, and people leaving. So they really needed an orientation to the actual research process and what is going on in this particular project, but also to the literature on transdisciplinarity, social ecology, and convergence research. So one of the interventions that we enacted really as a result of this evaluation study was to create a formalized orientation process and a community of practice. So for this particular project, it had very clear training implications, right? So I took some of the aspects of my transdisciplinary problem-solving course and, kind of provided a mini kind of session for our team members over here.
Thank you.
Great.
Hey there.
Hi.
Hey there. Great presentation. Craig McClay here, longtime listener, first time caller. And I just wanted to kind of lift my question up in the chat there, which is around, like I do a lot of bringing like the academy and the community together, only to find out a lot of times that they're speaking different languages, like literally, like they have to develop a common vocabulary, so forth and so on. So I have to be real intentional about designing meetings that allow for people to do those things. And I'm just wondering if in your work, if there was any intentionality in design of specific activities during the meeting that could help kind of help the group coalesce, get to know each other, but also do something productive towards the goal there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely does. I mean, I can speak to this. One of the things, about the language and vocabulary, we realized this was not a problem, but, a kind of growing pains, you could call it, for our research as well. So one of the things that we developed together, and Stan and Meg worked really hard on this, was to develop a glossary of terms, for our research. And that was one of the key interventions that came out from this evaluation study, that team members still don't understand you know, the difference between a watershed and a sewer shed, for example, or what the difference between transdisciplinarity is and interdisciplinary is, and, you know, how are we defining our disciplines and fields, you know, because they themselves are evolving and socially constructed. So one key activity, and the way that we did it together. We developed that glossary together, and it's a work in progress, right? It keeps changing as a result of as we learn more and we incorporate more literature. So that's one activity. I talked a little bit about the idea tree exercise that we did, and Dan knows about, you know, the idea tree exercise. So one of the ways that we modified it is because we are a dispersed team and we were not co-located, is that we created a very simple kind of colorful Google Doc, you know, in which we gave our team members prompts and asked people to respond to each other on those prompts and build a kind of branches and trees with different colors and, you know, on the evolution of our ideas. And then we analyzed that to come up with a set of themes. And that's what the integration expert in this team did, you know, to kind of on the back end, to come up with a set of themes that emerge from that idea tree exercise. And then we presented it to the team to kind of for critique and for reevaluation, to develop a more finalized kind of set of list of questions, you know, integrative questions. And then that actually was used as a basis for coming up with new subgroups. You know, instead of the biophysical team and stakeholder team and governance team, we came up with more, you know, mixed groups, subgroups that address these integrative questions. And I must say there was resistance to that as well. We saw some, you know, oh, I'll go and, you know, I'm comfortable here. And I really like these questions. I really like these questions that I've been doing, you know, that I know the most about. But, you know, we still were successful, I have to say, in mixing up these groups a lot more. And then I'll let Stan and Meg kind of add some more activities. Another thing that we did, I just forgot over here, was a cognitive mapping exercise that we did in one of our reflections with our team members, where we asked people to draw what they thought this team was like and what this research was addressing. And that gave us a really good idea of what the students, postdocs, faculty members in this team really knew about this project. You know, what was the knowledge about the system? So that's another exercise that integration experts could use. And I'm happy to share the slides as well as the paper. You know, that was one of the questions, as well as ideas for these activities. Stan and Meg,
I can jump in on one. It's more on the stakeholder side of the equation than the research team side of the equation. But one of the things that I think was particularly valuable for me was trying to understand a little bit how they framed the issue and their language. And one of the things we did early on was develop a set of concepts, kind of like causes of salinization, consequences of salinization, and actions that might be taken to mitigate it that were in their language. So they helped co-develop these concept lists, and we used them to develop fuzzy cognitive maps of their perceptions of the system. And we realized, you know, kind of later on, that wouldn't have been great if instead of having one concept list from the beginning, we'd gone back and we developed a new one and a new one and a new one as it evolves, because it was just so powerful to see that through, you know, their eyes. But that was one thing that we did try to do that I thought, at least for me, was really illuminating.
Well, this is amazing. I feel that we maybe should have had a 2-hour seminar because we could all talk for a long time. I love this. Something that stuck out to me that you said, Shalini, is this is a work in progress, which I think this whole community is, where this is what makes it very fun and compelling, is that everybody is willing to just play cards on the table. Here's what we tried. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. Let's all try to do the stuff we're trying to do at the best level that we can, do it well on purpose, and cheer each other on. So thank you for sharing so much amazing work in this last hour. And thanks to the community for showing up. And thanks to all of the InterReach team. It is such a treat to work together. And please, anyone who is hearing this, consider yourself part of the InterReach team. Reach out to us if you have input, fill out the survey. it's just really lovely that people choose to show up together for this. And want to thank everybody for being part of this season, and for doing all the great stuff that you do in the world.
Thank you so much for inviting us, Christine, and the whole Interreach team. Such a pleasure
Thanks, everybody.
and
Well,
a delight.
same. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.